I've been reading a wonderful book called Initiation by Elizabeth Haich, which many of you have read. Initiation by Elizabeth Haich, spelled Haich. And last night I read such a transcendent portion of this book. I just have to share it with you to give an inkling of what's in this book so that you can be motivated to secure it and read it yourself. This is from chapter 24. The title of the chapter is Sons of God. And it's on page 152 of this particular version, which is copyright 2000 by Aurora Press Incorporated. Elizabeth Haich lived from March 20th, 1897 to July 31st, 1994. And she taught in Hungary and Switzerland for many years. So Elizabeth is experiencing a past life memory. When she was in Egypt, her father was the Pharaoh and her uncle is the high priest. She desires to be initiated from a very young age, and although she's warned that she's not quite old enough and doesn't have certain experiences, she decides to keep asking, and it asks 3 times, and finally she's allowed to go through initiation, and this section is just before that series of initiations begins. Look, my child, and this is her father, the Pharaoh, speaking. Look, my child, for you to understand many of the things here on earth, you must first know something about the earth's development. Just like all the celestial bodies in the universe, and like all the forms of life on these celestial bodies, our earth is subject to the laws of constant change. The divinely creative forces radiate from the eternal, infinite, original source, and in constantly expanding waves, they penetrate the plane of matter. That is to say, matter is formed from these forces. This process reaches its highest point in ultramatter, then automatically reverses itself. The process of spiritualization begins again, and the matter is transformed into force. But this process takes eons of time. The changes are going on regularly, but so subtly and slowly that they cannot be noticed or observed in the course of a human life. On the other hand, some changes, which require thousands of years of slow and unnoticed preparation, occur suddenly and visibly when the proper time has come. Right now we are living in such a period of transition in which changes are noticeable. One of these phenomena is evident in the fact that various races of people with roundish skulls are led and governed by rulers who are spiritually greatly superior to them and who are even different from them physically. They have a more graceful figure and an elongated cranium. Once there lived on earth a race of people very different from the races living today. They manifested completely the law of spirit and not the law of matter like the races of people living today. These people were conscious on the divine plane and manifested God here on earth without any admixture of the self-seeking characteristics of the body. In their divine purity, these people deserved the name, the Sons of God. Their entire life was based on spirituality, love, and selflessness. And they had no physical appetites, urges, and passions to cast shadows on the spirit. The members of this high race possessed all the secrets of nature, and as they were perfectly acquainted with their own powers, and kept these powers completely under the control of the spirit, they were also able to control and guide nature with all of its tremendous forces. Their knowledge was boundless. They did not need to earn their bread with physical toil, and instead of earning their livelihoods with the sweat of their brow, they put the forces of nature to work. They knew all the laws of nature, the mysteries of matter, the powers of the mind, and the secrets of their own being. They also knew the secret connected with the transformation of force into matter and of matter into force. They constructed devices and tools with which they could store up, set in motion, and utilize not only the forces of nature, but also their own spiritual forces. They lived happily and peaceably as the dominant race in a great part of the earth. At the same time, however, other creatures similar to the sons of God were also living on earth, but with much more material bodies and on a much lower plane of development. Obtuse in spirit, their consciousness was completely identified with the body. They lived in primeval jungles, struggling with nature, each other, and animals. These creatures were the ancestors of present-day man. The race of the sons of men you see in our country represent a cross between these two races. As I said a moment ago, the law of constant motion and change is at work throughout the universe. The earth is now going through a period in which the process of materialization is advancing. This means that the divinely creative power is moving farther and farther on into matter, and the power on earth is gradually falling more and more into the hands of ever more material races of people who were once under the guidance of higher, more spiritual races. Little by little, the higher race is dying out. They are withdrawing from the plane of matter to the spiritual plane, and they will leave humanity alone for a period of time, as time is reckoned on earth, many, many thousands of years, so that humanity may, without visible guidance, climb upward with its own power. And so it has come about that this animal-like material race of the cavemen is experimenting in accordance with divine laws, growing mightier and more powerful until the time comes for it to begin ruling the earth. Before leaving the earth, however, the higher race had to implant its special powers on the lower race. Through the operation of the laws of heredity, this will enable the lower race, after a long, long process of development, to arise out of matter again. This is why many sons of the divine race made the great sacrifice of begetting children with the daughters of primitive man. Through this first crossing of the races, there have developed new individual types and gradually new races of people. The divine power of the sons of God and the mighty physical powers of the daughters of men have produced different types of descendants. On the one hand, physical, and on the other, spiritual giants. There have also been physical titans who, from their mother's ancestry, have inherited primitive, undeveloped brains. In these persons, the spiritual power of their fathers, working on the material plane, created tremendously strong bodies. With their gigantic physical strength, these individuals have overcome weaker persons, and because of the animal appetites of their nature, they have become tyrants greatly to be feared. But there have also been spiritual titans who have manifested their inherited creative powers through the higher centers of the brain, rather than on the lower physical plane. These spiritual giants were assigned the task of leading and teaching for a time the lower animal-like body-conscious race of humans, as well as the hybrid race, which later rose through the interbreeding I have already mentioned. These spiritual giants have the task of teaching the people of these two races wisdom, sciences, and arts as the basis of a higher civilization, and of giving them a good example of divinely universal love, unselfishness, and spiritual greatness. That is why there are some countries today where despotism and tyranny are dominant, while others are ruled with love and wisdom. This will gradually disappear, and humanity will know the great initiates and their secret sciences only through historical records, tradition, and legend. However, even at the darkest period of human development, by virtue of the laws of heredity, there will be the possibility that a son of God may be born in a human body in order to show humanity the way out of darkness and misery. Father, I ask, is our country the country of the sons of God? No, my child. The continent which once was the home of the sons of God has been completely destroyed. Gradually there were fewer and fewer descendants of the divine race. They left their mortal frames behind them and did not reincarnate themselves. Finally, there were only a few left in various parts of the earth to transmit dominion to the human beings who were constantly growing in power. Because of the interbreeding of the two races, however, there arose some individuals with a knowledge of magic acquired from their fathers and the animal-like, physically oriented selfishness of their mothers. They were able to infiltrate into the temple, and by virtue of their spiritual powers, they received initiation. However, they degraded their knowledge to black magic and made selfish use of their own powers and the natural forces they controlled with the instruments and equipment of the temple. The sons of God who were then still living in this part of the earth saw what was coming. They knew that these powers mercilessly destroy anyone who uses them wrongly, that is, with satanic selfishness instead of with divine unselfishness. They knew the black magicians were headed straight for perdition, and their blind avarice would cause general destruction. So the last sons of God built huge ships, closed on all sides and even insulated against the forces which penetrate and dissolve matter. Then they secretly took aboard a few of their instruments, their families and their domestic animals, and closing all openings, they sailed away from the part of the earth that was to be destroyed. Some sailed north, some east, some south, while some sailing westward arrived here where we are now. The black magicians soon lost control over their instruments. It should have been their task to conduct the highest cosmic divine forces into these instruments and store them there, because the only source of this power on earth is the human being himself. But the more selfish these people became, the more a change took place in the current with which they charged these instruments for later use. One day, when the sons of God and their insulated ships had already sailed away to a sufficient distance, the tragedy occurred. One of the black magicians unintentionally conducted into his own body a force which dissolves matter, that is, changes it into another form of energy. When this process has once been set in motion, the matter which has been transformed into energy goes on and on, acting as a destructive force, until it has dematerialized everything. In this way, the whole continent was destroyed. Finally, the new forces thus created slowed down and eventually halted the process of disintegration. The entire dematerialized continent was transformed into energy of radiation, at first rising up to the upper reaches of the Earth's atmosphere, then returning transformed into the primordial form of all matter. After further transformation processes, the whole gigantic mass fell to the earth again in what appeared to be an unending downpour of water, mud, and sand. The waters of the oceans rolled over the gigantic cleavage in the body of the earth. The land masses of the other hemisphere, split asunder by the cataclysmic shake-up, moved farther and farther apart in order to restore equilibrium throughout the earth, until they finally occupied their present positions. Part of the destroyed continent now lies in our country as a mighty desert of sand, and there is a danger that winds may carry abroad these mountains of sand and cover up fertile, inhabited areas. The sons of God in their ships had special instruments and equipment to stabilize their vessels and keep them horizontal at all times. Thus, they survived the catastrophes and finally landed. In every part of the earth where they set foot, they began a new civilization. With their knowledge, wisdom, and love, they won the hearts of the natives. They became rulers. They were worshipped, revered as gods or demigods. Their first acts were to construct suitable buildings for their secret instruments in order to insulate them completely from the world outside and provide adequate protection against the powerful, penetrating energy stored up in their instruments. These buildings, which we call pyramids, can now be seen in all the various parts of the earth where the sons of God fled with the instruments they salvaged. Profoundly impressed, I listened to the story of these tremendous events. It cleared up many things I had not understood before, but not everything. How did the sons of God bring these mighty blocks of stone and set them in place, one upon the other? I asked. Do you remember, my child, the Pharaoh replied, that I told you the sons of God did not need to work with physical force because they caused the forces of nature to work for them? We still possess some of these instruments with which we can control the gravitational force of the earth at will, neutralizing it or amplifying it, depending on the result we wish to achieve. In this way, we can make an object weightless or inversely even heavier than it normally is. When a huge block of stone has been made weightless in this way, even a child could push it about with its little finger or raise it to any desired height. Ships were piled high with these gigantic blocks of stone without being overloaded, because the blocks had been subjected in advance to the proper form of radiation and so made weightless. All the gigantic edifices, here and in other parts of the world, which human power would never have been able to build, were erected by the sons of God in this way. So I think that's enough for today. You can see that it's a tremendous historical record that's being shared by the Pharaoh, who is also a very high initiate, with his daughter, who is a previous incarnation of Elizabeth Haich. There's much, much more, and the next chapter begins her initiation, and it's also very, very exciting.